Thank you for joining us for today's PAVE Coffee Chat, Retail and Sustainability. Please join me in welcoming our host for today's chat. Nina Han Butler is the Director of Store Planning and Facilities at global fashion house Valentino. She is responsible for all openings, renovations, and maintenance of the 20-plus boutiques in North America and oversees a team of specialists in store planning and maintenance. Prior to Valentino, Nina was a member of the store design team at Tory Burch, where she opened 30-plus stores. With over a decade of experience in retail design, architecture, and construction management, Nina designs and builds each project with a sustainable mindset to reduce, reuse, and recycle. CallisonRTKL's Yarden Harari specializes in sustainability and leads performance-driven design in the Seattle office. Yarden's goal is to embed sustainability and resilience in CallisonRTKL's culture. Her mission is to broaden access and deepen strategies for the next generation of green design. With years of experience in specialty retail architecture and clients such as global brands Cartier and Dior, she has a keen grasp of the sustainability challenges faced by the industry. Her focus on materials management and the circular economy, and she seeks to bring people together to identify new approaches to these complex sustainability concerns. Yarden was a 2018-2019 Pathways to Equity Fellow, blending an ambitious vision with real tools for systemic change. She is currently leading the Just Label process for social justice and transparency benchmarking within CallisonRTKL. At the conclusion of today's chat, we'll be hosting a brief Q&A. Please send in your questions using the Q&A button found at the bottom of the screen. Now I will turn it over to you, Nina and Yarden.
Thank you for hosting us. We're really excited to be here. I'm Yarden Harari, and the topic today is retail and sustainability, but I think it probably makes sense for us to talk about how we got into retail in the first place. So Nina, I'll let you kick it off.
Thanks, Yarden, and thanks, PAVE, for hosting this. We're so excited. So I kind of got into retail when I moved to New York about 10 years ago. One of my best friends was working at Tory Burch at the time. She was on the international team and had a job opening for a store planning coordinator, and I absolutely loved it. Working there, I had the privilege of being on the design team working directly with Tory Burch on new store concepts, and I was there during her peak expansions. We were opening about 30 plus stores a year. I'm extremely happy to have found this little niche market, blending my passion for fashion and with my background in architecture. It's been an amazing journey so far. And now I'm at Valentino and I oversee all the construction processes. My favorite part about the job is probably being on site and being able to problem solve with the local contractors and architects. Yarden, how about you?
I kind of stumbled into retail also because someone that I knew was working client side at DVF, and that was where I started also about 10 or so years ago. And then I moved to the firm side, I think, because I really like the variety, and it's fun for me to see just access to different project types and also see how different brands operate. And I think like I stayed in retail for quite a while just because it is fast paced. And so it's really fun to be able to see kind of the fruits of your labor very quickly, having projects kind of go from paper to built in probably less than a year most of the time. And I think like Nina being on site also has always been fun because I think that's also where we get to hang out with all the people that we've been working hard with. And I think just seeing how things come together and working with all the people that you kind of cross paths with, whether they're on video or phone, and then it's kind of fun to kind of have that together. But I think long story short, I had a chance to pivot into more of a sustainability role in the last 2 years. So we actually never had a chance to work on a project together.
I know, which is a shame because I feel like we work really well together, but we're working on this together now. But yeah, we also just met at a random holiday dinner that one of the GCs that we both had worked with put together, and it was so amazing. We talked about how many resources there are in the construction industry that are it's so wasteful, our industry, you know? I mean, I read this one statistic that 569 million tons of construction and demo debris were generated in the US in 2017, which is also the year we met. But it was twice the amount of the general municipal solid waste. So that's insane.
Yeah. And I think it's like those numbers are inconceivable. But I think what makes it kind of tangible and on a visceral level is just the fact that we, working in this industry, get to see some of the nicest materials, especially when it comes to kind of specialty and luxury retail, going into these environments and coming from across the world. And we put a lot of effort, right, bringing them to life. And I think, you know, we want to take care of those materials, even if the store doesn't last forever. You know, none of us want to see that go to waste.
Totally. I mean, exactly. Valentino is an haute couture maison. They sell gowns for over $200,000. So our boutiques need to match the same level of luxury as the beautiful gowns and products they sell. So we also need to cater to all of our clients, whether you're shopping for a gown or you're shopping for our signature Rockstead handbag or shoes. But yeah, all of our furniture, fixtures, chandeliers, terrazzo, everything is made in Italy, and the lifespan of our shops are typically only 10 to 15 years versus like a normal commercial building, it's 120 years. So it's definitely a lot of waste. But what does sustainability mean in the context of retail?
I think that short lifespan is kind of the perfect segue. In like traditional sustainability, the focus is a lot on kind of energy and water, and that assumption is kind of based on us building sort of lasting forever or a really long time. And when you're thinking of these stores only being around for 10 or 15 minutes, or sorry, 10 or 15 years.
That's even worse.
Really fast pop up. There's, you know, it's great to have those kind of flows of energy and water use be more efficient, but the real impact starts to be around the materials, right? This is a lot of stuff that's kind of passing through the market, kind of where we're sourcing them from is also far away, and where they go can have a real impact on the communities around us. And so I think for me, it's also part of the pivot into sustainability as kind of my day job, synced up timing wise with the fellowship that I did that was called Pathways to Equity. And some of the tools that program gave me that really helped was thinking about how we can look at cultivating some of that larger kind of organizational and systemic change, which sustainability is obviously a part of, but it's also kind of breaking down a little bit what is otherwise really abstract and vague, kind of this big kind of issue in the market, and how do we start to kind of take away chunks and make a little bit more sense of it. So I think in that lens too, you know, maybe you can talk a little bit about what goes into making a typical kind of retail project come to life.
Yeah, definitely. So each project starts with lease negotiations with the landlords. We'll discuss construction timelines, lease duration, and any design requirements at the centers. And then simultaneously, our internal teams will develop P&L business plans to verify if the financials will align with our targets. And then internally, lots of people are involved. You know, we have the design process from the retail side, the merchandising, operations, IT, and then all of the final approval comes from our Milan headquarters. And then externally, we have David Chipperfield. He's our design architect. We have our local architects who review the drawings and for code compliance, and our millworkers and lighting designers, and all the other fixtures are produced in Italy. So then once everything's been approved, the fun part begins. Typically, our boutiques are about 3,000 square feet, and the construction takes about 13 to 15 weeks, depending on the concept. And then during the project, Every project manager will have weekly calls with the contractor and the architects to ensure that the project is on schedule and on budget, which is very important. And we typically go to the site about 3 to 4 times, which I love, just being able to be there, like you said before, and see everything that we designed on paper come to life. That's my favorite part. And then after construction is complete, we'll turn the store over to the operations team and the visual merchandising team to add their finishing touches.
That's in a nutshell.
Exactly.
Really well said. But yeah, that's a lot of moving parts, kind of in a lot of different directions, with everyone having their little piece of the puzzle. So I think when it comes to us changing processes and thinking about handling all the stuff that's kind of coming in and out a little bit differently, what do you think we're going to be dealing with in terms of the challenges that we can anticipate?
Oh man. Fashion is constantly changing. You know, our collections are changing, our store design concepts are changing, especially right now. We're really challenged to try to bring people into the store. Everybody craves newness, whether it's a new colorful rug or beautiful window display. All of these elements need to be produced locally or internationally. And we typically do not reuse something that's part of a previous concept. But whenever we do a renovation, I try to keep as much freestanding fixtures as possible so that in our local warehouses around the country, so that we can upcycle by, you know, reupholstering something or giving it some customization to one of our wholesale partner shops or our other locations that have different concepts. So sometimes we donate the items that are no longer in use, but the challenge with donating something is that some items are proprietary, such as our terrazzo, you know, because that's when you see the iconic terrazzo store, you're like, oh, there's a Valentino store. So when we were relocating our South Coast Plaza boutique, the landlord requested us to keep all the shelving and everything that was attached to the walls and floors in place for the next tenant, which extended the life cycle of the materials. But we didn't want the next tenant to display their goods onto our iconic terrazzo. So we ended up deciding to paint the entire store white, but we could have done more. We could have, you know, demoed it and turned it into something new. And other times the concept is just so drastically different that we can't really use it for another store or anything else. But there's got to be a better way. What do you see in other projects?
And I think, your point about just, you know, that you're walking into a Valentino store when you're walking into a Valentino store. I don't think I ever would have thought that I would have this knowledge, but if you were to kind of show me any luxury retailer, I would probably be able to tell you without looking at any of the logos, like, this is a Cartier, this is a Dior, this is a Chanel, right? And they're very kind of tied through the materials to the brand identity as a whole. And so this is not just a Valentino challenge, right? This is a challenge for retail in general. And I think that's something that I've seen or kind of noticed as I've drifted away from strictly retail, is that people outside of retail don't realize how rigid of a constraint that is, right? Because materials are part of the intellectual property that the brand has to protect. And so it becomes this really complicated thing of wanting to redistribute these goods, and how do we navigate that in a way that is also managing kind of the identity of the brand.
Yeah, definitely. And we recently had a collab workshop that Yarden put together. It was so incredible. She brought all these people together and we all talked about sustainability. It was amazing. How did the idea come up?
So it probably evolved over the course of the last 2 or so years. I think I've had a chance to go to kind of Green Builds and Living Future, which are a couple of the more kind of overarching sustainability conferences in the industry in the built environment. And I went to this session that was called Greening the Codes, which is probably not the most enticing from the outside, but it was really interesting because, you know, you think about the building code and that's baseline, right? That's kind of the worst building that we can build legally. And this group of presenters and panelists were talking about, like, if that's our baseline, what if our baseline is really ambitious, and what can we achieve if just the bare minimum is really progressive and putting us in this great place kind of ahead. And they talked a lot about embodied carbon, which I'll give like very simple, oversimplified definition of what that is, but basically it's the emissions or the energy that come out of creating a product. And so you select a material, the energy that was used to create it is kind of baked in. And they mentioned, you know, planning for codes in just a few cycles, like 2030 and kind of incrementally towards 2050 of net zero embodied carbon projects. And, you know, for retail, if materials are cycling in and out, coming from somewhere, going somewhere else, how do you net that to zero? And I kind of bounded over to one of the presenters at the end of the session, and I was like, that was very interesting, but what about retail? Like, what do we do about that? And she was really candid with me and said, you know, I'm terrified. I don't know. Like, I'm not in that world. Let's talk. And that was the really awesome start of this dialogue, to kind of be able to bridge these two kind of gaps where, you know, retail is a really niche industry. Everyone kind of knows each other. It's a small world. We all tend to kind of cross over and work together in different capacities. Sustainability is its own kind of small world. And also kind of the social side of it is this third prong that is kind of very much affected, but they don't always cross paths. And so for me, I think it was on a personal level, how do I bring all these different threads in my life together? But more broadly, as architects, we kind of sit in the middle. So what's our role in this ecosystem, right? We kind of sit between navigating codes and code compliance on projects, and then the client requirements and design, and then the pressures of kind of making sure it all comes together in construction. And so instead of constantly feeling kind of caught in the middle between these different pressures, how could we change that and use that kind of position to be the conveners and kind of bring people together?
Yeah, which is definitely what you did for the workshop. You brought all these people together. It was awesome.
We had a party.
What were some of the goals of the workshop?
So I'd say that it's twofold. Kind of that first one was definitely just bringing people together, and meeting the real people that are kind of behind these efforts, that people might not realize they're only kind of one degree of separation from each other, or also just not thinking about the fact that there's someone behind policy, like writing and making these decisions around what they think can help move the market in a certain direction. And then the second part of it, which really is kind of the meat and the content of the workshop, was how do we kind of come together around solving this complex issue? And this big idea of, you know, what if landfill didn't exist? And what would we have to figure out if we wanted materials to kind of go somewhere useful and have a good life, right? And the workshop itself was around 80 or 90 participants, which is bigger than we first planned for. But that included also about 20 to 25 internal facilitators so that we could do it virtually. But about 60 participants were representing a bunch of different perspectives in the design and construction process. So we had people from the code kind of policy level at different cities or different regions. We had contractors that specialize in retail and could speak to kind of what happens on site. And like Nina was one of the kind of retail brand representatives. We had a few different brands to kind of get an understanding of like the nuance of how is it different. And also several kind of connectors. We had manufacturers in there, but also people who are starting to bridge the gap and present either different business models or consulting around materials, and starting to identify those new ways that we might start to work or are achieving this resale and reuse in potentially a residential market. And so starting to get people together that each might have really deep expertise on kind of one side of this, but no one has the full picture. And so we can kind of fill in the gaps for each other. And that was what the workshop was intended to do. So we had kind of 8 different breakout groups and intentionally had them cross discipline so that you have people with the time to talk to each other and learn from each other and have that kind of more comfortable dialogue for a little over an hour. And Nina, I'll probably hand it off to you maybe to speak to what came up in the discussion in your breakout group.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about what sustainability looks like, why it's important, what are some challenges, how can we use and think about some new material pathways. In my group, like Yarden said, there was a policymaker, somebody with 25 years of experience upcycling demo materials. What? That's incredible. Somebody with an architectural background in education, a general contractor, and other retailers. So we talked about so many things. Like there's so many opportunities of how we can, improve this space and how much we are not doing right now. It was almost a little bit overwhelming, but also inspirational. It was incredible to see how many people were already thinking about this space and how we discussed some small wins and some quick things that were already happening. One of the main topics that came up in the multiple groups was the idea of, and probably the one of the most important for the future generations, is designing with the intent to demo. Like what materials and construction processes create the least amount of waste, because concrete is super wasteful. They really clog up the landfill, and when we're doing the design phase right now, we're not thinking, oh, in 10 years, we're going to have to demo this space, And so really thinking about that. Some of the challenges that we face in the industry are things that are harder to recycle, proprietary materials, which we've already kind of touched on. But we were thinking you could crush the terrazzo into a new terrazzo type of material and either sell it or try to integrate that into a new store concept. Some other harder to recycle materials were electrical equipment. And we were thinking we could donate that to technical schools to learn about how to wire things properly, and thinking about the waste, like a marketplace where you could go and have an inventory of salvaged goods from each retailer. Either it's like chandeliers from Cartier or chairs or even HVAC equipment. For instance, right now we're doing a potential demo where there's an oven in the store, and it used to be a restaurant. So what can we do with that oven, and maybe resell it, or finding someone or someplace who could use these things that, one man's trash is another man's treasure, So how can we do that?
Yeah. And I think that ties a lot to that social impact aspect of it, which we touched on a little bit, but I think you realize, a big part of the question is who can benefit from us kind of moving materials around differently. But also on the flip side, like who bears the brunt if we're not doing this in a responsible way and we're not taking accountability. And so there's, I think, like Nina mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity to get involved in this market. And that's part of the question is who gets to participate too, not just in this conversation that we had, but more broadly. Like there's lots of gaps in how we're doing things today in order to get materials kind of back as useful resources and not kind of thrown away. So I think that's a really great point. And Nina, I know you mentioned some kind of quick wins. And I think that was also realizing that some things are just done because they're practical. And what can we learn from the things that we have already tried to figure out because we want to reuse things to save on costs? How can we be even more intentional about that, right? We figure out the logistics when we have to. And so if we can start to change some of the language and be kind of more purposeful and also, you know, treat these things with the value that they have, that we know that we've already spent on these projects to begin with, to start to kind of unbuild them or take them apart in ways that maintain that value.
Yeah, certainly. And also thinking about fashion, like, can we reutilize, older collections and change that material into something new? Maybe we could change it into a building material. Maybe we can change it into a wall material. Just trying to rethink everything of how you did, because like you said, some things are just done because they're practical, and that's how we've been doing it for this entire time. And kind of rethinking materials, how we use them, how they come about, and also recycling creates a ton of jobs. I was reading on some website that said in 2016 the upcycling and recycling market created 236 jobs. And right now, unemployment rates are high. So this would be the perfect time for some new industries to creating jobs. What were some other key takeaways and themes from other groups?
Yeah, that's a great point on the jobs too, is that we're dealing with the physical materials, right? So there's a lot that has to happen, right? It's both, you know, technology, connected networks, but also there's a lot of stuff to work with. And I think, you know, you mentioned kind of crossing over between your product supply and then that turning into potentially built products for your stores. And I think that kind of crossover started to bubble up in a few different ways in the conversations. That idea that also, you know, you might have lights that are in a retail store, but they could cross over into a different sector, right? They might be good for a nonprofit or an office even. You know, there are things that maybe are branded, but there are also things that are kind of just units that are practical and that can carry over between retail and other things. And so a big point, I think, was that there have to be a lot of options and there should be redundancy in where different materials can go, because you want that kind of healthy ecosystem. You want there to be competition between kind of different options, and just really there isn't one right answer, right? It's kind of like a both and not an either or. And I think another that came up was this sort of cycle or two-way street of, you know, flow of support, but also pressure to change. And I think, you know, the ways that we'll step out of our comfort zones are either because it's required or because it's less scary. And how do we make that less scary? One natural inclination is usually, right, change the rules, right? Then we'll have to figure it out. And that's where that code and policy come in. But we also need to set ourselves up for success. And so it's not necessarily trying to take on everything at once, but realizing that this is going to be kind of a step-by-step process and that it's a long road ahead and we're in this together. But that also maybe one project is only a focus on doors and we're going to try to save the doors and see what we can do with them, or save the appliances and donate the appliances, and then lights, right? And you can sort of build and layer on that and kind of build that collective knowledge base together. And I think just having a connected network of people, that came up so much. Really, it's us talking to each other and starting to realize that we're all kind of thinking about similar challenges, but from a different perspective. And we can start to solve each other's problems maybe, or at least band together to sort of build up that scale. And then also scale in this is, it's not one big, large, centralized operation, right? Scale is going to be many players and it's going to be localized for the places where the stores physically are. And that's kind of analogous to how retail already operates, which is kind of great because it gives a little bit of a head start, right? It's everywhere and it's having that reach in a lot of different places, even though the stores themselves aren't kind of one giant mega operation.
Right, exactly. I feel like we all need to come together. It's not just, one brand doing amazing things, because, our stores are so small. They're only 3,000 square feet. There's recycle programs in Georgia where a lot of the carpets are manufactured, but they're not going to take this measly little rug, you know. If us and a lot of other brands come together and we have a giant truckload, then it's more worth it to recycle something. But yeah, certainly, like you said, it's all about relationships, partnerships, you know, other brands coming together. And I think the collab really opened up the door to start the conversations, to have these collective ideas come together and really make a bigger impact, because we all need to be doing the same thing, because also sustainability, there are economic barriers, you know, because it does cost a little more to demo and recycle than to just completely demo something. So if it's across the board, like you said, also if it changes the code or something like that and we're required to do it, I think that is a change that really needs to happen.
Yeah, and to that point, you know, the codes, one of the policymakers had mentioned, right, that code can help regulate, but this also really has to be driven by the market. The code won't push it forward. And that's where those partnerships between brands and starting to figure out how you get to that scale of, you know, the take back programs being successful if you as one brand don't have that. But I think the other part of it too that retail has kind of that head start on is that you're usually thinking at a portfolio level, right? You have multiple stores, you're planning for kind of a lot at once. And so you can kind of think of it as a program as opposed to having to reinvent the wheel and kind of do one-off projects every single time. So there's a lot of lessons learned that can kind of keep building on themselves.
Yeah, certainly. Let's see.
Yeah, what about, I guess, beyond the workshop, have you had some ideas of how you kind of see things moving forward and evolving?
Well, right now, due to the economic crisis, we are really rethinking about, you know, limiting cash flow and thinking about how to reuse and recycle. So, for instance, our Houston store, we are currently designing it, and it's been in a bunch of different design phases and changes because of changes in leadership. And we designed the entire store maybe 3 different times. And unfortunately, we had already ordered some of the furnitures because the project got delayed because of COVID. And so there's plenty of other reasons too. But we were able to reuse some of the furniture, like you said, thinking about the network and everything. So we were able to reuse some of the fixtures for our Bellagio store. We're doing a refresh there, and so it all worked out really well. Just kind of thinking about how to reuse what you already have instead of creating new.
That's good. Yeah, small wins.
Small wins, exactly.
And I think, yeah, that helps all of us, right, to hear about these little success stories, even if they're, you know, we have to take things bits at a time. And that helps ease some of those barriers too, is just being able to socialize this and talk about it a little bit more and say, hey, I tried this thing, it worked, or this was a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so daunting, everything that we need to do, but if we just start one step at a time with these relationships and, you know, with just spreading the word of how to be more sustainable, even in our daily lives, you know, we need to start somewhere.
Yeah, I think everyone starts somewhere, and that's the biggest thing. There'll always be people that have paved some of the way for you, and then you kind of take it and keep going, and it helps kind of redefine and evolve the definition of success as we go. So that might be a good moment to end and open it up for any questions.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions for you guys. How do you pick vendors to fabricate and design your stores? And how critical is that sustainability when you're making your decision?
I guess that's a question for me. So we
Sorry.
have all of our designs come from David Chipperfield. So everything comes from our headquarters. They kind of decide what is approved by our creative director. And sustainability now definitely has a huge impact because we were using these tables from Denmark, and they were kind of like called a melting pot table. It was basically melting pot of CDs, of garbage cans, of plastic. It was just, and they're so beautiful. So we definitely take sustainability into consideration.
Fantastic. And Yarden, are you guys planning any additional workshops? And if so, when will the next one be? And how can someone become a participant?
We definitely are. I would say reach out. We don't know yet. So the first one was just a few weeks ago. It was right at the end of September. And I would say for that one, it was just starting to pull together at least a few people that we knew were interested, and then definitely want to open this up to kind of more people, more typologies. So if you're interested, just find me on LinkedIn, I guess. But we'll do more. And I think what we definitely want to figure out is how to make it more public and make it more open, because the more the merrier, honestly. And we need everyone in this conversation. So don't have a date yet, but
And if you can't find Yarden, you can email info@paveglobal.org and we'll send that information over to her.
Perfect.
Or in the Q&A, if you're interested, just leave your email address and we'll collect those and get those over to Yarden. Either or. Have you guys considered donating to materials for the arts? Nina.
Yes, we actually definitely have. We talked about that at the collab as well. We talked about donating it stuff to schools, or some things that are, custom made for the store. We talked about donating it to museums and things like that. So it's definitely a conversation.
Okay.
And I can maybe build on that too, is that I think something that came up in any of these conversations around material kind of deconstruction too, if we're talking about the stores and they're at their end of life, is you need that demand for reuse, or you kind of need to know where the destination is. So if you're someone out there that would want to receive materials, then that really helps close the loop on figuring out some of what's going to happen. So appreciate that kind of connection.
And like the marketplace that we were talking about earlier, kind of having this online place where you could go to and you could find these things, and it could be, just the retail industry, so that the quality is top
notch. Okay. Do you guys plan on incorporating solar panels or a greenery area for the rooftop of the retail stores to help lower the heat wave levels? And this can be for you, Nina, and maybe Yarden, something that you've been working on separately as well.
So for a lot of our locations, we don't actually own the buildings. So this would have to be a partnership with the landlords. But I think going forward, that's definitely something we should look into, because, energy costs, that would be a perfect, economic and environmental partnership to lower costs for energy bills, but also better the environment. So that's definitely something that's a great point, and we should definitely look into that. But unfortunately, we just don't own our buildings. I wish we did, because all of them would have solar panels and green gardens.
And I think that's part of, we didn't really have like landlords represented in this first workshop, but lease agreements and kind of that bigger scope and bigger view is super important. To Nina's point, right? A lot of retailers are interiors and don't necessarily have access or the ability to either the green space or the roof itself. And I think one thing that I also would want to, I don't know if caution's the right word, but kind of in talking about these short life cycles, that if any solar panels are introduced, you also want to find a home for them if they're going to have to get removed, so that we're not, going back to that embodied carbon, is those solar panels do take a lot to make. And they also have a lot of chemicals in them, right? That are just ingredients that we don't want to just like toss out back willy-nilly into a landfill. And so kind of continuing that idea, those are great. And let's build on kind of this similar idea of making sure that if they're being installed in somewhere that's temporary, they have that kind of continued second life or plan for them to live out their full potential.
All right, here's a question I was wondering if we'd get. Sustainability is costly. How do you propose to deal with those costs? Someone has had issues that in their company that everyone is so price conscious that no one wants to pay the price for sustainable products.
I can take that one to start, and then maybe Nina, you can
Sure.
build on it. I think there's a real branding exercise opportunity in this, because cost obviously is a barrier, but it's not the only barrier. And so there are ways to get, break down some of the other kind of things that might get in the way. And I think making this either kind of the cool thing to do, and as more people do it, making it standard also just reduces that uplift of costs. I think for a while it will cost more, but also there might be opportunities with, I'll give an example of a business model that actually might make it easier and kind of a win-win, is this company called Doors Unhinged, and they're out of Pittsburgh. And so kind of they're a small business, but they go into existing spaces, take commercial doors out with the hardware, and then they kind of warehouse them and they resell them. And the way that also helps the owner is that then you're not paying for that demo. They're kind of coming in before a demo is starting, and you're getting that benefit. And so it's probably case by case, but there's little ways to start to chip away at that cost barrier.
Yeah, I agree with Yarden, because also it needs to be across the board. All brands need to be thinking about this, and then costs will slowly go down on their own, but also, thinking about creative ideas to put together a business plan or a P&L saying, look, this is how much it's going to cost, but in the end, this is how much it's going to save. And also there's a social impact, right? Because on Women's Wear Daily, I read so many articles about sustainability. I feel like sustainability is one of the hottest topics. It's either gender inequality or sustainability are the two hottest topics. And, also fashion is becoming more sustainable. So many designers are really focusing on using more sustainable materials, even though it's a little bit more costly, but now also a lot more consumers are more conscious. And they're saying, I would rather pay a little bit more for something that was sustainably made versus something that like is fast fashion or something like that. Especially along the supply chain, like these labor laws, it can't just be one person saying, I want to create, have manufacturing done in the US with safe labor laws and correct wages and things like that. It needs to be all the brands across the board should have more strict labor laws and be just more humane.
Yes, that positive peer pressure
Exactly.
starting to work. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think COVID, silver linings, right? That it kind of sped up the conversation that we're having right now. It's like something needs to change. So, silver lining of COVID.
And are there any considerations to reduce carbon footprint when sourcing materials? It's the understanding that some of the brands require consistency and oftentimes the material travels overseas. Are there ways to locally source similar materials or work with manufacturers locally to replicate the brand material?
Yes, we're actually doing that right now. we try our best to ship it via sea so that it reduces the carbon, but it's pretty difficult to find someone local to be able to match the same level of quality that we find in Italy. But we're working our best to do it because obviously right now we're really, challenged to cut costs, and, shipping materials, giant terrazzo panels via airplanes is definitely not cost efficient. So we're definitely looking into that. And Yarden, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I think there's going to be maybe like a hierarchy too, right? The terrazzo is something that might be a more challenging thing because it's super visible and super branded. But then maybe just harkening back to the doors is like, maybe that's something where you can source those locally and even source them reused if they're just doors that aren't, something that's custom. And
or like back of house doors.
Back of house. Yeah, where things we can start to kind of like chip away at the things that maybe are high impact too. Furniture and lighting are super kind of carbon intensive or just carbon dense, right? In terms of how they're made and the fact that they're made of a lot of different components. So if there are things like chairs that are back of house, right? That there are kind of looking at some of that impact within the store too. And I think where interiors gets interesting is that there is a lot of that nuance, right? When you're not dealing with structural materials as much, that is like a bulk of the weight if you're thinking about all the things that can get either recycled, reused, but are also kind of a lot of carbon emissions kind of baked into materials. But if you sort of strike that giant chunk off the record because you're not dealing with that with the retail stores, you do have to start kind of getting a lot more specific and seeing like, okay, well, of what is in our scope, because these things don't have a long lifespan right now in this like specific application, what can we start to do within these, right? And if you're starting to source doors that are not kind of being made fresh each time, or chairs or other things, then or chairs that can come apart, right? So that at least you can reassemble, reuse the parts, or send them back to the manufacturer to do that. And that's starting to come up too, where the manufacturers, we're kind of all have to share this responsibility, sort of push each other upstream, push each other downstream, and kind of help both support and apply that pressure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we just recently in South Coast Plaza, we had some poofs that were yellow and made out of suede, and they were kind of ruined because somebody put their foot on there, or I don't know what happened. Crazy things happen at the store. And usually would be like, oh, let's just throw it away because it's so difficult to deal with it, and we'll just order a new one. But, we took a step back and we said, no, what if we, ordered the new fabric from Italy and then did, reupholster it locally? And that's what we're doing. So definitely small wins. And actually, we did find almost a very close terrazzo match locally. So they're still working on it, but we're slowly getting there.
Yeah, and I think that this is a little blend of the cost sort of and how easy it is to throw things away still. That's right. That's not a brand by brand thing. That's this like macroeconomic issue that we have to start to shift. And so right now, it's tough. We each have to kind of chip away at that cost barrier from different directions, because it does still cost less to just throw something away, even though it has all of these other benefits to not do that, but they're not kind of getting factored into what we have to account for in our kind of day-to-day business. And so there's a lot of stuff that's invisible or externalized, but is real, and it's a real issue out there. And so I think it's starting to change that conversation and kind of what we're taking into our purview from these different disciplines. Because on a personal level, I think no one wants to see things go to waste. And so I think that's a big part of this is like, okay, if we're all on the same page of what we believe as individuals, just talking together to be like, okay, well, where are these barriers? Like what's getting in our way if we're all in this together? And so haven't sorted through that, you know, that's what we're starting to chip away at with these workshops, and hopefully starting to do some pilot projects so that we can kind of build on that and figure out some of these things step by step.
Yeah.
For future retail locations, will they be ranked as LEED Platinum buildings?
We actually haven't really thought about doing LEED because it's very expensive, and also sometimes the LEED, I know Yarden can probably talk more about this, but because she's a LEED professional, and but sometimes a lot of it's really like a checking the box kind of situation. Instead of it being the max sustainability you could possibly be, it's really like spending more money to kind of check these boxes. So I've brought it up in the past, but we did try a couple stores in Europe that I think are LEED Gold, but and then also some of our stores are just so small that it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I think the conversation here too is also, you know, what's going to be the impact in real, like how do we actually make this happen at end of life? And LEED really helps to kind of set you up for success in terms of this specific topic, right? And talking about in retail, when we're doing a LEED project, it definitely enables all of these great things, right? If you're trying to remove toxic materials, and if you're going through all these steps, it helps you then kind of figure out new homes at the end more confidently. And maybe this isn't quite answering the question, but I think here it's also like, okay, but what happens at the end, right? When the place is meant to come apart, or kind of at the end of that life, how do we save things? I think what came up was definitely, you know, looking at LEED and wanting some kind of framework, right, to help guide this. Then it would be, you know, how could we zoom in into that materials and resources section, where, you know, if you think about well, a lot of times that's kind of like indoor environmental quality, like really like getting really rigorous with kind of that from a few different perspectives of how they approach it. And maybe there's something here with like, this is LEED focusing on that category of materials and resources, which are the ones that are more challenging to achieve in LEED, just because of the market. Like the market's not there, and that's part of where LEED is trying to put in some of those credits to help move the market, and that's really kind of commendable from USGBC. But it's now also, how do we as an industry really like make those things happen at the end of the road of a project, so that it facilitates, right, those material credits. So I don't know if that not LEED overall, but I think metrics and having a framework are always helpful to kind of have that comparison across different projects.
And, Nina, do you see you guys making this as a part of your brand story, what you're doing as far as sustainability? And then kind of part two to that would be, who have you guys looked to or maybe admired at what they've been doing regarding sustainability? I know there's a lot of great brands out there, from Patagonia to Allbirds to Adidas, doing things very sustainable and eco-friendly. Is something you guys looking incorporating into your story, and who have you admired the work they've done?
Yeah, we love all of those brands. I would love for us to do more, but right now in our last collection, we did a partnership with Levi's, and they, it was all their vintage and jeans that were part of the fashion show, and it was incredible. If you guys haven't seen the fashion show, please go watch it. It was one of the most amazing collections, I feel like, but I do say that for about every collection. So that's definitely, I feel like across the board, all luxury brands are really thinking it. Allbirds and, you know, Patagonia, they were kind of the pioneers of this sustainability movement, and, you know, luxury brands are now getting on board. I think across the board, from like Dior, Gucci, you know, Valentino, we're all trying to do our part and become more sustainable. And I think the Levi's collaboration is the first step in the right direction. And in our stores, I mean, definitely we are, we're really thinking about doing more pop-up stores because we want to have the newness and things like that. And we're, designing them right now using a lot of the materials that we currently have in our warehouse. So really just trying to think outside the box and be more creative with reusing and recycling. So definitely we're going in the right direction.
All right, I got two more questions for you. For the storefront advertising, have you guys considered moving to digital screens rather than using print?
Digital screens.
For storefront advertising, or even within the store, to use more display LCD, maybe low energy stuff versus reprinting over and over and changing that out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the whole industry is becoming more digital, with a lot of brands are now having these where you can do a virtual walkthrough through the store. Kind of e-commerce is booming right now because of you don't really feel comfortable going into the store. We're really putting a lot of time and energy into the technology aspect of retail.
And I think this actually came up in one of the breakout discussions in the collab of, I think it was talking about an office, right? But if the logo of that company is changing, like I think they're thinking about having a screen instead of it being, a physical kind of piece of logo. And I think it's been a little while, right, since I've been kind of down project by project in the retail world, but there's definitely more, I think, screens that are easier to change out the content. So it's that double factor of, right, this is really practical actually, if you can upload new content rather than have to bring people in to kind of change out a giant graphic in a light box. So I think that's a great point too, of one of those moments where you can say, like, this is actually more convenient. And it has that flexibility of kind of built to be adapted.
Yeah, or like augmented reality and, virtual reality coming into the store. And I've seen a lot of brands have these virtual storefronts that you can't see it unless you put your phone there. And then you can see, I think Louis Vuitton did something really cool where you have to go to their Fifth Avenue location and you bring your screen up and you see something else. So I think that's definitely the future of fashion. And, all the fashion shows this year, a lot of them were mostly virtual. So
yeah, less physical stuff to change out, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one I got for you guys, and this may be very useful for some of the students and for some of our industry professionals. Any good resources out there? I know someone gave a plug for buildreuse.org. Are there any other sites out there that you would suggest people check out to learn more about sustainability and the reuse of materials?
I will 100% second build reuse. I think, we've mentioned networks and people a bunch of times, and that's a really wonderful network full of people that are really experienced in the materials reuse world. And I think there's a benefit for more people who are in kind of the commercial or the retail side of the industry to kind of plug into that one, because a lot of the traction has been in residential. But there's a lot of like kind of cross lessons that we can learn. Another one that is kind of similar is the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group. And they have kind of webinars every so often, and it's a lot of that focus on kind of the deconstruction and sustainability side of things. Yeah, Nina, anyone's that you have?
One in Georgia that we were looking at from the collab.
The Life Cycle Rebuilding Center?
Yeah,
maybe?
and there was the other one in Maryland. I can't think of on the top of my head what the location was, but Honestly, just in Google.
Yeah, and I think Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a lot of great resources, and I think that's like there's a lot of like Venn diagrams of all these different networks sort of intersecting. Carbon Leadership Forum is another one that's more kind of around the carbon aspect of it, and just I think once you start, you can sort of orient yourself as you get familiar with the conversation too. But yeah, there's lots of great people out there, which is really reassuring. I think that there's a lot of interest and a lot of expertise.
All right, that's all we've got. I really appreciate it, Yarden. I appreciate it, Nina. Thank you for spending a little time with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank
Thanks
you,
to
everyone.
everyone.